Well, the old hotel looks just about the same. Old Black Magic sitting right in the front. Sure looks pretty. Hotel is now owned by Nick Patel. He bought it from his parents. Boy, he sure needs to take care of the roof. The rest of it, pretty much typical as the way it's always been. The Tom Mix sign is still here, although I have pretty well refuted that he stayed here for a year at a time. I can't even find any information that he ever stayed here at all. Hasn't changed much since I was here last. Hotel Vendome lobby has changed respectively since COVID started. Exterior is about the same as it's always looked. Inside, lots of changes. Well, they sure did change it. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. The old Annunciator is still on the wall. During our last visit 6 years ago in 2014, the manager at that time went up to room 16 and demonstrated for me how it works and how many times it goes off when there's nobody in the room. Historically, here's a pic of that front desk area and how it looked during our last visit. A couple of hunt buddies checked into room 17 across from us. There you go. They told me that when they checked in, the TV in their room was on when they opened the door. Wow, this is really different, huh? Wonder if the cowboy likes this. In April of 2009, I exited room 21 where we were staying and watched a cowboy step through the solid door of this room out into the hallway. Flat screen TV.
Yeah.
Big bed.
Oh, hey, look.
Fan.
There is a blind now.
Blinds.
There's
This is a real big change since the last time that we were here. So where the hell do you set the equipment up now?
Looks like they
probably on the
covered
floor.
part of the window right there.
They sure did. Yeah.
Is it a king bed now?
Sure is. Well, this is room 16, Abby's room. Oh my gosh. What a change. What a change. Since 2009, we have stayed in this room 3 more times trying to capture that apparition.
No table.
No table, just right there. At that time, the manager told me what I had witnessed was Tom Mix, which turned out to be inaccurate. I had no idea who the cowboy was until just recently. Oh, yes. In contrast, this is how the room looked by surveillance in 2014. My only concern is that some of the furniture items removed from this room and taken elsewhere may have been trigger objects. All tables like this one having been removed, setting up the equipment was a little bit of a challenge. Placing the equipment on top of luggage left it unstable and prone to damage. It was a little worrisome about the stability of the equipment. On my DVR. Once set up, it didn't take long to get our first response from one of the cell sensor units. I set 3 cell sensor units up, and the only one that is out of sight is in the bathroom. What was that?
I don't know.
When I went to check on it, I found the water in the basin was on. Not all the way, but about halfway.
What?
Water's on.
What water?
Come up.
The TV lost the sound.
The water goes on, my DVR stops working. There is no camera in the bathroom, so without proof, it's just anecdote. About 15 years ago, a fellow by the name of Ken Edwards did a nice little book on this room, In Search of Abby. You used to be able to buy a copy right down at the front desk. That's where I got this one from, but not now. It details a lot of ghostly happenings of this room. Edwards also correctly pointed out that the name Abby was derived from a bunch of psychics that came to the hotel who did a seance. That was the name that was given to the ladies having the seance, along with the information that she claimed that she had been an owner of the hotel, that her husband had abandoned her when she fell in ill health, and that she had died along with her cat. The cat's name was given as Noble, and that's why everybody leaves cat toys around the room. As Edwards points out, which was easily verified by the museum, Charlotte Hall, there was no owner by that name. In fact, there is nobody by the name of Abby Burr even listed with a death certificate in the state anywhere. But that doesn't mean that there might not have been somebody else who loosely fit the story, because there is. Not my cowboy, of course, but that doesn't mean there's not more than one apparition roaming these hallways. The first death that may have occurred where the Vendome now stands was actually in 1915, 2 years before the Vendome was completed. I said may have occurred because these buildings have all been renumbered. It lists the number where the death occurred at as dwelling number 232 South Cortez, which today there is no such thing as 232. The current Vendome rests at 230 South Cortez on Lot 9 of Block 20. Her name was Julia Augusta Wood, age 44 years old, and she died from cirrhosis of the liver. Cirrhosis is scar tissue which is built up on the liver either from a bout with hepatitis or from chronic alcoholism. We don't know which it was. Although in 1915 I think it would have been rare for a female to die from chronic alcoholism. Males, yes. Females, eh. The informant to her death was husband H.R. Wood, stands for Homer. The 1900 census shows that the census taker crossed some numbers out and scribbled their number in as 234, not 232, and then it jumps up to 240. Lot 240 shows to be owned by Henry Ross, who was one of the early day owners of lots 9 and 11. Both lots were believed to have structures. But we don't know if that house number applied to both lots as it had common ownership. It could be that the home the Woods lived in is the home where the Vendome was later constructed. Going from assessable tax records, historians believe that there were tax-assessable structures on both of the lots that Jones would later buy to build the Vendome. If there was a structure in 1900 on Block 9, Lot 20, where the Vendome now stands, it would have had to have been one of these numbered structures. But owing to the same records, the historians also believe that the Lot 9 on which the Vendome stands was completely vacant at the time that Jack Jones bought it for construction of the Vendome. It is generally believed that that structure burned down, but they don't know at what time or year it did. The 1910 census shows that the Woods now live in home number 232 on Cortez, and the next structure up is 228. Wow, must have really been tough getting mail during these times. Lots 9 and 11 would change ownership several times, and on May 22, 1917, J.B. Jones purchased them from W.H. Williams, which stood for Woodville Houston Williams, and that has importance just down the road here. By 1920, Julia is dead, the building on Lot 9 is burned down, and the Vendome has been built, and owner Jack Jones, along with his wife and daughter, now live at 240. The Vendome's first manager, Clara Worthen, didn't make it but a few months, maybe due to a personal issue between her and Jones. But lest anybody claim that she is the mythical missing Abby Burr, here is a copy of her obituary from 1954. The 1920 census shows a second manager, Josephine Brow, in charge with 9 roomers. Julia's widower husband, H.R., is now living at 232 where he'd been before, this time living with his sister. That would be the structure which is just north of the Vendome, but we don't know if that's the same structure or not. H.R. could have ordered that those numbers be redone. If he and his sister had relocated to the smaller house just north of the Vendome, this would have provided for uninterruption of the mail. And he is just the person that could have ordered it done so. You see, H.R. Wood was one of the earliest representatives from Yavapai County to the newly created state senate in 1912, and he was considered the strong man of the Senate, a real lion, so to speak. He could have easily ordered that the structures be renumbered. Wow, being married to the lion of the Senate in 1912 almost sounds like a reason why a wife could become an alcoholic, just saying. Homer would way outlive Julia. He didn't die until 1952. Both of them are buried there in Mountain View Cemetery in Prescott, and the epitaph on Julia's grave, wow, can anybody say it's Vendomish? Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is not dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Our next tenant, vying for Vendome's Ghost of the Century contest, falls short in the attachment category. 43-year-old James R. Taylor from New York died on November 5, 1918, less than 1 year after the Vendome was completed, of pulmonary tuberculosis. You remember tuberculosis. It's that other pandemic going on today, above that of COVID, still considered the world's leading source of infectious disease. Hey, it even killed Doc Holliday. But even if James came in and stayed the whole year, it's still short compared to other tenants. Natural death? Probably no attachment. I give Jones a lot of credit for being able to screen out potential illnesses in his tenants. During his years of ownership, this is the only verifiable death that occurred on the property. Jones tires quickly of this hotel business, and in July 1921, 4 years after opening it, he starts running ads down in Phoenix to try to sell the hotel. He doesn't even put his name in there. He says to contact the manager, Mrs. Brow, for details. And then an issue comes up. On January 21, 1922, J.B. Jones files a lawsuit against one Mary E. Williams, deceased. Remember that guy Woodville Houston Williams that sold him lots 9 and 10 4 years earlier? Well, this is his wife, and he's left the state and she's dead. This suit had something to do with advising remaining heirs that he's seeking some kind of title to the property, because at the bottom we see it's represented by Zeba O. Brown, who was the attorney for Prescott Title. Perhaps there was an issue and he was seeking a quitclaim from the court. Maybe a buyer came forward and he found out that he couldn't sell it after all. This notification had to be run for the length of time as stipulated under Arizona law. Just 4 months later, in May, the paper reported that John and Edith Dial had taken out a 5-year lease on the hotel to begin from June 1st. The Dials were well known in the area and is generally thought that they stepped in as management after Brow left, but this shows they actually had de facto control of the property. In November, Jones applied for a new brand for his cattle, so we can see where his heart went, back to the range. Somehow along the way here, a guy by the name of Henry Brinkmeyer got involved in this by obtaining apparently de jure ownership, meaning actual ownership of the hotel, while the Dials were allowed to keep de facto ownership through a lease. Brinkmeyer already owned one hotel and a bakery, and this is the ad for that hotel. And we know the information is accurate because Brinkmeyer himself said so in an ad that he ran in 1927 trying to offload the hotel to somebody else. That somebody would be Egbert K. Dutcher, son of a local physician. Dutcher took over the lease from the Dials and then bought the hotel outright. During the few short years that Brinkmeyer owned the hotel and the Dials ran it, there were no deaths. Dutcher would not be so lucky. This is where we start seeing evidence of possibly major attachments to the property. It was during his 19 years of ownership that reports of paranormal activity seemed to start surfacing. The first census showing occupancy after Egbert took over is the 1930 census. In the 1930 census, we now see the Vendome at its proper address of 230 Cortez. We also see the names of owners Egbert and Florence Dutcher, man and wife. They have owned the hotel for about 3 years now without any deaths or major problems, but now it's 1930 and the Great Depression is underway. From their marriage license, we can see that Florence's last name was Sandifer. This is important because Florence's parents, H.C., stand for Herschel Clayton Sandifer, and her mom, Martha, will become major players at the Vendome. Her parents live in Wickenburg. For those out of state, that's a mining community about 60 miles south of Prescott. H.C. is in construction. There is no construction during the Depression. He runs for a position of Justice of the Peace and loses handily. Like many during the Depression, they're about ready to become homeless. And they just happen to have a son-in-law that owns an entire hotel up in Prescott. Egbert does the conscionable thing and allows his in-laws to move up into the Hotel Vendome right after this census was taken. As his in-laws, he probably gave them free rent in lieu of working around on the hotel. Now, if we skip a little ways ahead of ourselves to the 1940 census, we see Egbert and Florence listed on there, and we also see Herschel listed as a father-in-law, but we don't see any mention of Martha. That's because 6 months after taking her son-in-law up on his gratitude, she dies from pernicious anemia, a condition in which the body does not make enough red blood cells, agitated by myocarditis, a long-term or chronic inflammation of the heart tissue. The first death that Egbert suffers in his new hotel is his own mother-in-law. There would be more. Father-in-law Herschel would live in the Vendome another 19 years. That's longer than most of us own a home. 6 months later, 36-year-old machinist Jerry Marvica was transported to Veterans Administration Hospital from the Vendome, where he died of pneumonia. He had only been in Prescott 4 months, a short-term natural death. And now, next in line, we come to the unusual case of Miss Josephine Tyler. If there's anyone that died in the Hotel Vendome that fits the story of Abby Burr, it's this little lady. She was born in 1894 in Indiana, about 50 miles across the border from Chicago. When she is 10 years old, her mother dies from tuberculosis. When she is 15 years old, her father dies from Bright's disease. That's an old-time name for kidney failure. She is raised by a great-aunt. At the age of 19, she marries a guy who is to become one of the top salesmen for Sunshine Biscuits, now owned by Kellogg. They divorced around 1921. He remarried and raised a family. She started getting asthma and bronchitis, and remembering her mother's bout with tuberculosis, decides that she needs to move someplace where the air is drier. We don't know what year she arrived in Prescott, but she can be noted on the 1930 census as having been living at the Vendome. On August 15th of 1933, after living in the Vendome for 4 years, she dies, with the underlying factor of the bronchitis. While the bronchitis was a contributing factor, the actual cause of death was listed as mitral regurgitation with decompensation. Mitral regurgitation is when the left-hand side heart valve leaks blood back into the system instead of pumping it out. Many people are diagnosed with a little leakage. What happens is that the heart compensates for it in other areas. When the heart decompensates for it, it means that it's giving out. It's not able to handle it anymore. That results in extreme fatigue and edema. Edema means that the heart and the kidneys cannot remove water from the lower extremities, and they start to swell up. This can be very painful, and the death certificate says that she suffered for it for the last 8 months of her life. That, combined with loss of breath from bronchitis, I can see no way that she would have been staying on the second floor unless she'd been on that floor for some time, before the infirmities became pronounced. In order to walk about to get the fresh air that she needed outside, go down the stairs, or perhaps even use the restroom, it would have required some assistance. And how would she call for assistance? By that annunciator box, which years after being deactivated and with no one in the room, still signals. My guess is it would have been old man Herschel coming to the rescue. Whoever helped her, they were very fortunate that she was a very small woman. Her 1932 voter registration, she listed her height as 5'1.5" and her weight at 85 pounds. Forgive me for being presumptuous when I say that someone in this condition probably would want constant companionship from a pet of some kind. However, the elements that do not fit the story of Abby Burr is that, 1, she was not an owner, and 2, she actually probably died in the hospital is what they listed here, although with the time of death listed at 12:15 a.m., she was probably dead on arrival or very close to it. She didn't get abandoned by anybody. Her obituary in Indiana says that she's buried in DeMott, but wherever her physical body wound up, I think there's still a big part of her there at the Vendome. 4 years and with her medical issues and leaving the only place that she found comfort, I think there's probably an attachment there. Luckily for Egbert Dutcher, the hotel would go another 13 years without a recorded death. Not so lucky is that next death would be his own father-in-law. On May 27, 1945, Dutcher ran an ad in the Prescott newspaper trying to unload the hotel, claiming that there was sickness in the family. The following year, on February 19, 1946, H.C. Herschel Sandifer was transported to the Arizona State Hospital in Phoenix because of myocardial disease, which is a heart attack or at least a precursor for it. 2 days later, another one of the hospital patients beats him to death. H.C. didn't die until 8 days later, but he never recovered from the injury, so technically it's still a homicide. And at the time of the beating, H.C. was 84 years old. Now I wondered, what could an 84-year-old man say or do that would make you want to beat him to death? Well, we were left 2 strong hints. H.C. didn't pine away too long about the death of his wife Martha. On November 24th of 1935, H.C. remarries a woman by the name of Helen Edwards. 53 days later, she files for divorce alleging physical violence, cruel treatment, and outrageous conduct. The divorce hits the newspapers because H.C. is now 75 years old and he requests to the court alimony. He says that because she makes $100 a month, he should get some of it. Whether he ever got it or not is not disclosed, but one thing's for certain, this guy's got some screws loose. The other hint is that the Arizona State Hospital is the Arizona State Psychiatric Hospital. Nobody ever checks into this hospital willingly. His daughter Florence and son-in-law Egbert may have had the old man committed against his will. He may have been that sickness in the family that was mentioned in the ad. Perhaps they perceived him as a threat to the guests. This hospital is understaffed, and today there are still reports of inmates beating other inmates to death. 4 months after they had Herschel committed, the Dutchers would sell the Vendome to philanthropist Dixon Fagerberg. Apparently, Egbert Dutcher kept the hotel all those years just so that his in-laws could live and die. His ownership saw 3 deaths, all of which could have possible attachments: his in-laws and Josephine Tyler. Fagerberg would own the Vendome along with many other properties in and out of the state until his death in 1956, at which time he would will it to the Salvation Army. First, however, he did try to sell it, to no avail. During his years of ownership, it was reported that the Hotel Vendome took a downward spiral, and there were a half a dozen deaths that occurred on his property during his ownership years and the 2 years that the Salvation Army owned it. But none of these appear to have any attachment to him. They were all natural deaths. Also, during the time of his ownership, the workmen on the property reported that it was then that people started coming around asking if they could try to photograph the ghost, quote unquote, which means that whatever was there started before he took ownership to the property. We'll do a quick review of those deaths for those that are researching for historical purposes. June 20th, 1948, female, Alice M. Miller, 76 years old, acute myocardial insufficiency, basically the same thing that Josephine Tyler had, except she was a short stay at the hotel. June 13th, 1951, male, Herman August K., 55 years of age, cerebrovascular accident, which is the medical terminology for a stroke. We're now into that 70-year time gap where I like to preserve patients' last names out of privacy concerns. This one we don't have to worry about because it did not involve a death. The November 16, 1951 Carmel, California newspaper reported that a distressed restaurant owner from that town had visited the Vendome and had stabbed himself in the eye with the spindle from the front desk. Ouch! Of course, years later, he could apply for a position as a pirate at Disneyland. Arg, matey. Just kidding. January 1st, 1955, New Year's Day. Male, John K., 80 years of age. Bronchopneumonia bilateral, which means an infection in the small air sacs of the lungs, compounded by a myocardial infarction. It's a heart attack. October 5th, 1957, male, Wilbert K., 62 years of age. Coronary thrombosis, which is a blood clot within the vessel of the heart. And coronary sclerosis, which is hardening of the vessels of the heart. Contributing factor, obesity. This is the first death that occurs under the Salvation Army's ownership. March 1st, 1958, male, William P., 69 years. Hypertension of the lesser circulation, which means hardening of the vessels in the lungs due to some underlying condition such as asthma or emphysema. Both are noted. That's as far as the certificates can be taken until the recent census is recorded. Then they will release another 10 years, up to 1970. There will undoubtedly be other deaths recorded during the Vietnam years when the Vendome was a flophouse. There is one left to report without a death certificate because it was reported in the papers, the full apparition Phantom Cowboy. Filming from room 21 down to room 16 where I witnessed the cowboy apparition walks out. I just measured it with a rangefinder and it turns out that it's further than I thought it was. I estimated it to be 20 to 25 feet and it actually comes out to be 32.5, 32 and a half feet, so that's quite a bit of difference. Going from room 21 down to walking out of those doors right there onto the smoking balcony, which is where I followed the cowboy as he went down. From this door right here, it's further than I thought it was. Actually, I guesstimated it to be 32 feet, and it's actually 42 feet 6 inches. Due to my viewing angle from room 21, it was impossible for me to tell that he had walked through a solid door there at room 16. So I stood about right here as I waited for the cowboy to move on out this door right here because I wanted to go down these stairs in order to get my coat, which was down in the car. During our last investigation, these stairs were carpeted. He stood at this door. The right door was open. There was a screen door there at that time, and he passed through that screen door out onto the smoking balcony without opening the door. I measured the distance from the railing to the entryway downstairs to be 14.7 feet. In my opinion, somebody would have to have paratrooper training in order to pole vault over that and not break an ankle. This clip from 2014 shows the then screen doors that have since been removed. The screen door you see open there is the door that I watched the cowboy walk right through without opening it. So who is this cowboy character that's able to walk through solid doors and leap tall railings in a single bound? I was never able to figure it out until recently. Following the Abbey book, Edwards did a second book on the Vendome in which he interviewed some of the previous owners. The Torps, latter-day owners, reported how in 1971 there was at least one suicide on the premises. The deceased was a male named Sullivan. He had been a lieutenant colonel in the military. He had committed suicide on Halloween night. And he had handpicked his casket the day before at the Hampton Memorial House, which is 2 doors down from the Vendome. The funeral house is still there. For years I tried to research this. Far too many Sullivans in the search engine queries. Then one of my search engines came up with a new method where you could link specific words in a search. The term Sullivan linked to the term Vendome pulled it right up. Edmund was the son of an Illinois Superior Court judge. Most of the information that the Torps gave to Edwards was inaccurate except for his last name and that he did in fact handpick his casket. Is this where my cowboy walked down here, picked his casket out, went back that night to the hotel room in the Vendome and committed suicide by barbiturates? The Arizona Republic of Thursday, December 2nd, 1971, had reported that California lawyer Edmund M. Sullivan, age 64, had committed suicide in the Vendome Hotel by taking an overdose of barbiturates. Sullivan was his last name, and he committed suicide on November 30th, not Halloween, October 31st, as the Torps had declared. His entire life and death were big news in Chicago. The Chicago Tribune of Saturday, October 14th, 1933, reported that Dennis E. Sullivan's son, Edmund, got the license to practice law. Father Dennis E. Sullivan was a Superior Court judge in Illinois. By December, I'm sure with a little juice from Daddy, he was appointed Assistant United States District Attorney. 3 years later, it was celebrity news when he got engaged to a woman named Isabel Gordon. The nuptials were set for December of that year. They were married on December 18th of 1936. His brother, Dennis E. Sullivan, Jr., also a famous attorney, was his best man. It hit the paper when they got a tan on their honeymoon. Chicagoans with a tan, gotta love it. So when was the last time you found yourself in the paper when you got a tan? The point I'm trying to make here is that this guy is used to being noticed. He's used to people watching him when he goes about his business. And I don't think that's going to change because he found himself in some kind of paranormal loop. By virtue of marriage, Isabel also became societal news. The birth of their kids was high society news. With the onset of World War II, in early 1942, he gave up his law practice in order to join the Naval Reserve as a lieutenant. A lieutenant, not a lieutenant colonel, as the Torps had reported. Isabel sold the home in Chicago and went to the naval yards in Oregon to be with him. Apparently, this was not a good move on her part. He was in the Pacific for a year and a half. I don't know if he saw military action, but for certain he was seeing some kind of action. By June of the following year, they were divorced, she claiming desertion, and she got custody of the kids except for 1 month out of the year. 2 years later, at the close of the war, a news article out of California announced that he had remarried to a Betty Snight. He and Elizabeth, a.k.a. Betty, moved to Carmel, California, and were there until at least 1951. Past that, nothing till his death. While his brother went on to be a very successful lawyer, he spent most of his time in California practicing minor law, probate, custody, disputes like that. I only saw one criminal case in the state ledger. He ran for Monterey District Attorney and lost handily. To his family, he would have been a failure. I used age progression software on this newspaper photo to try to turn it into 64 years old, the age he was at death. And of course it didn't turn out how I wanted it to, but it did appear to be pretty close to the cowboy that I recall. Next, I framed these photos of him, his divorced wife, his marriage, his honeymoon, and even one of his adult daughter, Leslie, who also became a socialite, and I brought them into the hotel as trigger objects. It was my sincere hope that since he lost custody from the divorce, these photos would thoroughly piss him off and I might get to capture some poltergeist activity as they were thrown about. 10 p.m., and this hotel is now deserted. There is no manager on duty at night. It is us, our friends in room 17 across the hall, someone staying in room 30 on this floor at the end of the hallway, and there are 2 rooms downstairs occupied. There's nobody here on the property now. Unfortunately, the smoking balcony, what they're now calling the veranda, also closes at 8 p.m. when the manager leaves, and this is an area that we are used to including in our hunt. I've set up my trigger object photos in the room and in the closet. I expect him to push them off before the night is over. There's nothing else up there. Starting at about 1 a.m., the room was plagued with errant noises. They were not loud enough to wake us, but the source, when being analyzed, is unidentifiable. I have enhanced them. Could this have been the baseboard heater? Possible. I didn't hear it in real time, so I didn't get down and put my ear next to it. But it's not the typical sounds one makes. And at 36 degrees outside, the ceiling fan was definitely turned off. These sounds were very low volume, about the amplitude of a normal EVP capture. And then comes this one. Although I adjusted the sound level here, in real life, you could hear it with your own ears. In fact, I remember opening my eyes and wondering what it was. What it is the sound of our door latch being thrown. Here's a comparison sound of me manually locking the door after we left the room. The phantom sound will follow. These sounds are definitely reverberating off of wood, and the only wood is in our room, the smoking balcony veranda, locked up, the stairway leading down to the downstairs lobby, directly behind our room, and the downstairs lobby itself, which is directly beneath our room. There was a lull of about 10 minutes, and then when Jan turns over in bed, they start right up again, like voicing an objection. Jan, always the skeptic of the two of us, believes that this is nothing more than another team investigating in the hallway areas, and that's something I can't discount because I didn't look. But if a human element was traversing the stairs, there are other sounds which we should have heard. Pretty hard to miss. They sound like this. That would be hard to miss coming through the floor on a quiet night. If that actually was a human element doing a hunt, they never came back to their room upstairs, and if they had originated on the ground floor, the DVR did not capture the sounds of them coming upstairs in the first place. But the truth of the matter is that after that last volley of footsteps, that was it. The DVR recorded no more sounds. The room was quiet for a couple of hours. At 4:35 a.m., the REM pod went off for the first time. Perhaps whatever was there figured that since it couldn't keep us awake one way, it was going to try another way.
Hey. What you got going on down there? Hey.
What is it?
REM pod.
Where?
That closet.
In the closet?
That's the closet right there.
Wow.
So we're going off at the closet there. Can you show yourself? Got a little bit of activity here in the room.
And that was it. Not even long enough to boot the camcorder up. Just long enough to wake us up. 3 hours later, a repeat. This time it's the secondary REM pod in the bathroom. And again, not long enough for us to get up and film it. There is no surveillance camera in the bathroom. It's too small. This would repeat 3 or 4 more times every 5 minutes or so. As such, I did just as you would do. I got up and closed the door so I didn't have to listen to it anymore. If it's not going to throw something at me or materialize, it can just stay in the bathroom. Back to bed, and 15 minutes later, the cell sensor on the nightstand right next to my head goes off.
Hey.
What?
Oh, found the cell sensor again.
And I kept doing that every 20 minutes or so. Finally, I just gave up and got up. I guess it had the last word after all. Well, noon, and we're finally up after tending to REM pods all night, and we're headed to Jerome. For those not in the area, it's an old west town. It's got stores and stuff about an hour away.
Hey, Ed.
What?
I'm talking to Ed Sullivan. Where do you leaving?
To be clear, that's Edmund Sullivan, not the entertainer Ed Sullivan.
I'm going down right now.
Okay.
Now as Jan heads downstairs, you can hear what it sounds like in real time without amplification. Ed Sullivan now has the room to himself until this evening. While the room is vacant, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, REM pod unit number 1 goes off, and it goes off for about 4 minutes straight, and I can tell at the end by the sound that it's making that the battery is now drained. It's not the first time we've seen that happen, that's for sure. We captured the same effect at the El Tovar Lodge up on the Grand Canyon and determined that it actually took 3 minutes and 10 seconds for the complete battery to drain. All in all, while we're gone, the room is pretty quiet. And then right at 7:44, there's an audible surveillance capture that sounds odd. When I listened to it, I thought, that sounds like a frog. There's a frog in the room. It actually records it twice. The first time is the strongest, the second time is kind of petering out. Listen to it and see what you think. And then the second time, a little weaker. Let's listen to it in real time again, just on channel 1. That's the channel that has the audio. Did you catch it that time? What do you think it is? Let's boost the audio way up and find out. Oh my. That is the tone for the old annunciator, the system used to contact the front desk in case of emergency. It's been at least partially disconnected for years now. When we were here 6 years ago, the then manager gave me a demonstration of how it used to work. The actual button for activation is up here above the transom door, the entryway door. As I recall, the activation button was right up in here somewhere. It may actually be above the transom, above the door there. It's kind of like a button that you push. The manager had to get a stepladder to get up there and do it because they took the cords down because people were pulling on it. But as you pulled the cord, it activated the button that's up there. The cord itself hung down alongside the door. I'm not certain that the assembly hasn't been removed completely. I didn't look when we came into the room. On this video, the date and timestamp is covering up where it probably is and we can't see it. I remember when he demonstrated it, the sound that it made to let the sender know that the signal had been received downstairs, and that is the sound. But this is how it worked. A tenant needing assistance would make their way to the door, pull the cord, and... So someone tried to alert the manager twice on a system that has at least been partially disconnected in a room that there's no one in. Tell me that's not cool. Do you suppose Edmund was trying to alert the manager that there's squatters in his room? At just before 9 p.m., we returned to the room, unaware of the capture from the annunciator.
We're home. We're home. We're home.
Time for one last check of the building before we turn in for the night. The downstairs lobby area sure looks different than it did when we were here 6 years ago. There is one more level to the hotel which during that time period we were given access to by the owner. The door to the basement is directly across from room 2 in the lower level.
Step.
Yeah.
It's low ceilings too. Just more just like our laundry area. This is storage.
One of the women said that she used to play down here in the book. She used to play down here when she was a kid, and she said she never experienced anything. So, I'm not certain.
I don't feel anything down here really.
In 2014, I watched the door to the basement open on its own. I thought Eric was bringing towels up. He was not on the premises. And now, back to the present. As I prowl the first floor hallway to the end and then back, I don't hear anyone. I'm not even positive there's anyone staying on this floor of the hotel this evening. I don't see any lights from underneath the doors or any conversations heard coming from the rooms. We and our friends may be the only ones booked in the hotel this night. Whoa, did you catch that? There was a voice there. Let's listen to it again. It has a slight echo, an earmark of some EVPs. I did not hear this capture in real time, only when reviewing the tape. So let's enhance it and see what we get. First, we'll just boost the audio gain. Well, that didn't help much. So now we'll increase it a little bit more and slow it down while retaining the pitch. Well, the reverberation's an EVP killer. And that's the way it is with some captures. Sounds like it's being shot down a tunnel or something. Speed slowed down 10%. While retaining the pitch, it sounds like it might be a long drawn out get out. Of course, by saying that, it plants a subconscious thought. So listen to it on your own, see what you think. If that's really what he's saying, then that's not very friendly. Especially since I went out of my way to bring him pictures of his ex-wife and all. Back to the room, the rest of the night was quiet. The odd bumps and bangs from the previous evening have now subsided. The following morning, before packing to leave, I tried an EVP session both with the electrosmog device and without, which provided a curious occurrence. This is EVP session at the Hotel Vendome on Tuesday, October 27th at 9:36 a.m. We're getting ready to wrap up our stuff and get out of here. So far, it doesn't look like we had much activity that occurred in the room when we were here, a little bit. So I've got the smog device going here, and I know that somebody can speak to that because they've done it before. It does not pick up any specific channels. It's not like a ghost box. It basically is only picking up the electromagnetism in a room. So I'm addressing this to who I believe my cowboy to be, which is Edmund Sullivan, right here. Edmund Mortimer Sullivan committed suicide in this hotel in 1971, on November 30th of 1971. Since all the activity is centered around this room, room 16, I believe this is most likely the room that he took his life in. The 10 or 15 minute session with the electrosmog detector produced no results. When I shut that unit off and just went to using the recorders, an odd thing happened, which had to be captured on surveillance by itself. When I brought up the name of the mythical persona of Abby Burr, this is what I captured. There used to be a rumor that an Abby died in here, a female entity. Is there a female entity here in this room? You can shut that REM pod off also. I know that Abby was a made-up name. What was your real name? The camcorder shut off. Not only did it shut off, but I got a blue screen on the viewfinder, just like the blue screen of death we used to get with old Windows 98. I've never seen a camcorder do that, ever. I am still using high-resolution mini DVD cameras because the infrared is much stronger than any infrared that is available on cameras today. I looked up the blue screen, and Sony says it is possible if the heads are dirty, but not on this model, and I clean the tape heads before each use. Well, that was real cute. Was that a response? Did you just turn my camera off? Because I mentioned Abby and I said that's not your real name? No answer to that. What is your real name? Well, Edmund, I'm going to say goodbye. I'm not certain that I will be back this way again since I haven't been able to talk with you. That's what I came for. If you want me to come back, tell me right now. Talk to one of these two devices right down here. Leave a message for me because I'll check them later on. You want me to come back? Leave a message. Tell me come back. Well, this is our fourth visit now to the Vendome, 3 since I sighted the cowboy, without any affirmative results. I know other investigators that want to take a shot at this, but barring that, we've probably had our fun. On this trip, we gave the Vendome an activity level rating of moderate and consistent. Now that's changed from in the past we would have rated it high and consistent, but equipment now has become much cheaper to get, it's much more reliable, and it's much better at making captures. Anyone with just a meager budget can afford to purchase the equipment where you can get the same captures that we got on this hunt, and you would have to have equipment to get the captures that we got. Alas, if we had had a surveillance camera in the bathroom to capture that water spigot turning on, so you know that it just wasn't a story that we made up, that would have boosted the activity level way up. But, goes the saying, better luck next time.